With everything going on in the world, people need to be uplifted. They need something that promotes character, creativity, confidence, and joy. The GRN show is not just an average talk show. The topics are powerful and will make you think. Join me on this journey to be informed, to relate, to connect, and to evolve. Good evening and welcome to the GRN show. According to an essay that Daryl Michaels, a professor from Howard University, wrote, he indicated that the very first Negro History Week was instituted in 1926 by Dr. Woodson. Dr. Carter Woodson was inspired by two people. You have Abraham Lincoln as well as Frederick Douglass, because of the pivotal role they have played in ending slavery. He felt that there should be a week that is set aside where one can reflect on that so we know where we come from. And also, from what I understand, it was a week where they said no lynching. But I think it grew beyond that. We're still celebrating Black History Month. You know, when you look at the number of mixed families, different backgrounds, different ethnic groups, different races, our society is becoming, I want to say, colorless. Colorless, not in a bad way. Simply, there are so many people in the US currently. They're either mixed from Black and white or mixed from different ethnic groups. There may not be a classification right now that truly reflects their background. So we've titled our show today, Black History, Our History. Every single one of us can find something in Black history that relates to us. And I am super excited this evening to have with us someone who really have pioneered, not only, presentations and different type of work, books and so forth about race relations and ethnic relations. So it is my pleasure to bring with me Dr. Kitty Oliver. She's an author, she's a historian, she is a performer, and she is also a community leader right here in Broward County and probably has traveled the world. So Kitty, good evening. What a pleasure it is to see you.
Good evening to you too. Thank you for having me.
It is wonderful, and I couldn't think of anyone else really do this show as we celebrate Black History Month, because coming from a Caribbean background, sometimes there are, I want to say, a lack of understanding about the different classifications that are used here in the United States. So, and I know you've done a lot of work there, so I believe our viewers will be enlightened. So let me start out with the very first questions. First, I'm really curious about what you're doing. You are a 2020 Encore Public Voices Fellow with Op-Ed Project. Tell me what that is.
Well, that is quite an honor, and it's something that I treasure in the midst of this 2 decades of work I've been doing around race and change and interviewing people across cultures about their race and ethnic experiences. Well, the Encore organization, which is a national organization and a network of so many other groups around the country that are working in aging, intergenerational issues, and social justice. So they chose 21 fellows this year across a broad spectrum of backgrounds and ages from the US, Canada, and England. And we have been pegged as thought leaders, that the work we have been doing in those three areas uh, could be highlighted on the national stage, so that all that I have been doing here in Broward County in South Florida, in Florida, sharing these stories I've been collecting for the historical archives and presenting on television and radio, are now being shared in a wider way with people around the country and in other parts of the world who are looking for information about how people are dealing with differences in a very real world way. The,
Mm-hmm.
the interesting thing is that this fellowship comes at probably one of the most challenging periods in our
That is
country's
true.
history right now, because there's with all that we're dealing with, the pandemic and politics and economic crises and racial injustice and white supremacy and Black Lives Matter, people will say that, well, maybe it's difficult to talk about race in the way
Mm-hmm.
we try to do, but there's even more of a need for these multiple levels of conversations, I'm finding, and because people want to know more on a heart-to-heart level, not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Terrific. Timing could not have been better, because again, so much has happened over the last few years. And I think it is important we go into these conversations at a much deeper level. So let me ask you, Kitty, over the years, there's been different terminology used to define African American. Obviously, we've gone from being colored, Negro, Black, African American, and so forth. I personally myself African American, not from an ethnic standpoint, but from a racial standpoint. So tell us a little bit about what would you tell someone who says, I'm not African American? It could be someone from the Caribbean, it could be someone from England. How would you go into the evolution of what we've seen from the time of slavery to now? We're dealing with Black Lives Matter.
Wow, that's quite a scope.
It's
Let me
loaded,
just
huh?
get a little corner of that to say that this naming issue, and we'll explore it a little bit deeper in a minute. But the naming issue has always been important because it's represented a reassessment and a redefinition of people who, for so long, had been defined by others. So if you look at it like that, I was one of those born into segregation. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. I came of age with the Civil Rights Act, and I was one of the first Black freshmen at the University of Florida, the first year that integration came. So I had to deal with all of those crossings that very similar to what an immigrant might go through to this country, moving to another country, to another culture, having to learn how to speak differently, having to learn different customs, having perceptions about me that I had to deal with. Some I would have been aware of and some I wasn't aware of. And assaults to the spirit, as I call them, and adjusting and learning how to adapt. The naming kind of came along with that because when I was born, I was colored. When I was growing up, I was Negro, and it was with a small N now. And by the time I got to college and through college, I was Black with a capital B because that had significance, that as a people, then to be at least capitalized, and then African American to be identified in an ancestral way. A heritage that you brought, just as Irish Americans, just as Jewish Americans, just as Haitian Americans or Jamaican Americans had. So if you can really kind of picture that from the small c and the small n to the big B to the big A. That's been a part of that evolution. Now, of course, now we're going to people of color, and especially with younger people beginning to see that kind of breaking down of one kind of identity for an embracing of something wider. So we'll have to see what emerges from there. But I grew up in Jacksonville, as I told you. And one of the things I observed in remembering that experience was that even when we come from seemingly homogeneous environments, or we like to say that, especially when we move to a new place, that, oh yeah, everybody was alike, everybody got along, everybody was great. And it's only this new place that has these dynamics I don't understand. But that diversity has been a part of those of us in the African diaspora forever, because we were many different people who were assembled by this colonial and slave system, and then enslaved and brought and had to find ways to meld and mix and become a unit wherever we ended up. And in Jacksonville, we had that because you had people from South Carolina and parts of Georgia who immigrated down to Florida instead of moving north like many Black people in other parts of the South. And those people were Gullahs or Geechees. And my mother's lineage is from that culture in South Carolina, the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia. You know, Hilton Head, many people will know, is one of those Sea Islands then that was brought up, and Gullah people were moved out, and it became a fancy upscale resort area. But the Gullahs were a mixture of African people speaking different languages and different customs, who found themselves in that environment through that slave trade. And they lived on the Sea Islands and worked there and developed a patois that they spoke, and they had certain cultures that went back to parts of Africa, and they were frowned upon when they left South Carolina and Georgia and came to Jacksonville, which was the city.
You know, it was interesting. The other day I was speaking with someone, and the person mentioned, well, you know, we need to include the Black and brown people. So this is a new terminology that is currently being brought up, because it goes back to the many cultures that are merging and families. So they refer to the minority community, what used to be minority community, the Black and brown community. So it's amazing how times, you know, you mentioned with the capital N, capital C, and lowercase, and then capital A for African American, which I'm sure was during the civil rights movement.
Right. Well, it
goes according to the times.
Yeah, it was definitely an outgrowth of the civil rights movement, no question about it. And just that you can see in a sense of a growing pride too. Even if there's some negotiation that has to be done, there certainly is a growing pride. One of the terms we haven't mentioned about today, though, is BIPOC. That has intrigued me too, because those are all capital letters of Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Interesting.
So anyway, I wanted to just play this little clip, this little bit of exchange with two people that I met. I was doing interviews with young Haitian students at this school, and there was an African American elder, I'll call him, just simply because he's older, and he was an instructor. And we got together and they started having a conversation, and the conversation flowed right into this topic we're talking about, naming. And just
Mhm.
look at this interaction of what happened in terms of what the elder ended up remembering and explaining, and the effect that it had on the young Haitian student.
We'll take a look at the clip and be right back.
Well, one thing I learned from my students who are mostly Haitian is that their viewpoint on color and African Americans' viewpoint on color seem to differ greatly. Um, Black, one thing that I learned from my Haitian students that all the Haitians that I know, and I have a couple of just like sons to me, they're proud to be Haitian. It's like I'm Haitian, and they're very, very proud to be Haitian. But in the African American community, during my time period, during all the riots and things during the 60s, we were Black and we were proud, because prior to that we weren't proud. Haitians had something to be proud of. They knew their Haitian history. You know, I learned about Toussaint, I learned about what he did and what the Haitians did, and they were proud people. We didn't have that. So we became proud because we were Black and we were different. So Black, saying that we were Black, not color, and being Black was a big issue. We were Black because we wanted to differentiate ourselves from other people. So we were Black, a Black proud people because we were Black.
I wasn't really exposed to racism until I came in the States, because in Haiti, you can call a person by their race and they won't get offended by it. And when I came here, one thing that I noticed was that in an African community, for a Haitian kid, like I could say we're different, but like for a person to try to when a person speak a different way, they would say, hey, this person is trying to act white, or is trying to, you know, they don't consider that person as Black. They consider Black as being like, you have to be doing music, you have to be doing this to be Black. And I thought about it, and I could say that it's because I came to a point where I think it's because like African Americans had really something really taken from them, like the actual culture, the African culture really, and it's what we Haitians have, and I think that's what differentiates us a lot.
Race can be a bridge across cultures and generations. The more we talk and listen, the more we learn. This is Dr. Kitty Oliver.
Kitty, that was amazing. It's interesting to see how the perspectives of people of different background, with the connotation it has for different people. So this was quite interesting. Now, let me ask you, in your travels around the world, tell me, what has race been like? You know, you mentioned you've traveled in England. I know you've been in Africa. Tell us a little bit. I know growing up in Haiti, there really was not a race system. It was very different. But tell us, what have you seen around the world as it pertains to race relations as well as ethnic relations?
Well, first of all, we know that there's no such thing as race. It's a social construct. We made it up. We're all one race. So if we made it up, then you can figure that it gets convoluted and complex, and things don't ever quite fit, and we're always wrestling with it. When I took this research work I'd been doing and folded it into a PhD work and a dissertation, I began to develop some new language for what we're talking about. It's really race-ethnicity, first of all, because race and ethnicity, which is what you're saying, is all tied up, the Haitian experience, for instance. what we may want to call it race, but it's really more like ethnicity. And then there's cultural racinicity, and there's class racinicity, there's interracial racinicity, there's intra-racial racinicity. So it's all a big ball that we come up with this term race. And I always like to say race, quote unquote. We find that in every culture. And we're talking about a racialized way of interacting that may not be color at all, but it is a sense of hierarchy.
Yes.
And how people interact and how off kilter that hierarchy gets as a result. And people suffer sometimes in really terrible ways as a result of that hierarchy. But you find it in all cultures. And in my travels, well, first of all, even here in Florida, Jews and Catholics were the outsiders within the white cultures. Those were the people initially discriminated against within the overall white culture, and Jews were actually in the literature, the American literature, seen as Black and categorized, you know, that way to a large degree. I was interested going to Spain, and there you had same language and people who you would think culturally might have the same background, but you had one group that felt like their language had been taken from them, the Catalans, and they were fighting to get their language in the schools, which they finally did. And now they're looking to want to even break away from Spain culturally because they see themselves as so different. And I met a young college student, and this was in Barcelona. And we were talking about traveling around Spain, and I had been to southern Spain, and he mentioned meeting someone from southern Spain who was going to the university with him. And he and his partner had the person over, and they were discussing politics and intellectual issues and all that. And he said when the person left, he said, my girlfriend and I both looked at each other, and we were so shocked because we didn't think a Southern Spaniard could speak intelligently like that and discuss issues. I mean, they're looked upon as just being musical, and they love to live and not work. And, you know, so
the Bohemian life.
The Bohemian life, but that hierarchy that just because of where they lived,
Gotcha.
where they came from, this was that kind of class system they had. And of course, in India and traveling, not only the caste system of not really being able to move out of that box you're put into, but looking at some of the advertisements of people who were ready to get married, and the parents who were looking for a proper mate for the daughter, and advertising that the daughter was light skinned or white, you know, that color difference meaning something. And then talking with someone from China, and who was saying the same thing, that, you know, you didn't want to be out in the sun very much to get dark, that there was considered that different, you were considered lower class if you had some color. So it's there. It's always been there. And the more we can talk about it, rather than denying that where we came from didn't have that. It may not have been what you see here, but we all deal with that and negotiate it. Now, when I went to Ghana, now we're talk about an all Black country. I interviewed people there. And of course, talking about race, they could only talk about it in terms of coming to the US, because the first thing was, oh, we don't have that here, we don't have that. But once I moved to the US or visited, I ran into it. But of course, later on, you find it, there are different ethnic groups, and different ethnic groups were ascribed certain roles in the culture. And there's the permanent underclass, the Ga, who are now trying to get into college and they're lobbying for rights and all. So, and then the Akan that have the great history that everybody hears about. So I interviewed this one woman, and at the end of the interview, I thought she was of a different ethnic group, and I asked, and she said, cultural group, and she said, no. She said, I'm of this one. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I said, well, how is there a way then you would know? And she said, oh, we wear different earrings.
Wow.
So we are extremely creative, we human beings. That amazing.
That is very interesting, because what I'm getting out of this conversation is that in every country, there is a system that really separates people, whether it's color, whether it's economic status, whatever it is not a racial system as we have here, but definitely a system where there is a group that is superior than the other group. And when we talk about racial institutionalized system, their own institutionalized system, really, where you have a lower class, very often who's not able to really get the opportunities to really advance, as we're seeing here in America. Am I getting it? That's what I'm sensing.
That is exactly it. And it isn't so much that it's a dirty little secret. It's just, we all have experienced it. And let's just talk about it, because this is what it is. And then, of course, if there are things that need to be changed, and there usually are, this starts us out on a route so that we can begin to make change when there are the disparities. But the fact is, it is a racialized relationship. And so if you can understand it, it's not race like this one based strictly on color, let's say, but it is racialized, be it on religion in some countries, be it on language differences in some other place, or be it on something more sophisticated and different levels. But here's the thing. We do grow and change now, no matter what is going on, what system we're a part of. And I love that, because that's how we move forward. And that has been the richness of those of us who are from the African diaspora, that we are so diverse that we end up having to be very creative in the way we find ways to connect, because we know there's a commonality in there sometimes. But isn't it interesting that every culture has a negative name for people who connect? The ones who move out of the culture to move forward. People like me, when I went to the university and moved into this larger world and embraced it, I was called an Oreo. Right on the inside. And then I started doing diversity workshops, and this Hispanic man was working with me, and he said, coconut, that's what they call us, brown on the outside, white on the inside. And then I started doing interviews and met this Chinese American man. He said, oh, banana.
Really? So the fruits are one of the ways to really identify oneself.
Except the cookie.
The cookie, the Oreo cookie.
But then with Native Americans, now that I've started doing some work in Montana, doing some presentations, they say apple, red on the outside, white on the inside.
Interesting, so interesting.
Always been negative names for white people who have an affinity for black. So it's just, the realizing that there's a push and a pull culturally and within us just as human beings, but there's also that need to connect. There's that drive to
absolutely
what we have in common and how we work it out. I met some people who had said that we are, they were doing a presentation, and they said that we are all cousins 52 times removed. And so if we're all cousins, we're human beings are the original dysfunctional family.
That's right.
So that's it. So we're in this together. We struggle, but we, have to find a way through. And that is something that Black History Month has begun to do in its evolution, because it has the ability to bring in so many other cultures by saying, this is our story, what is yours? And so then now we have other heritage months and cultural months, which are great. It's saying these are all parts of the story, parts of this human story. It's not isolated, yours or theirs or whatever, but let's put in our part and see how it resonates. Now, sometimes the parts get very complicated. And this next young lady, little short clip, is going to talk about this issue of racial identity, that with the blending and mixing and that is happening culturally, and especially in the Caribbean, it's brought another layer into this Black historical story, one of how do you identify yourself?
My experience with race, or having to define my race as a mixed person, really started when I moved to the US. When I came here, it started, I think, when I was filling out applications for college. And every single form asked, what race are you? And I found that very difficult because I have a lot of races in me, and so I didn't know if I should check each box, or my box didn't seem to be on the form. And so that was the first time when I really questioned, well, what race am I? And I kind of decided that, well, I'm of mixed race, which a lot of people don't seem to identify with. My grandmother she's deceased from China, and her husband, she married a Black maroon from Jamaica. And so my father is mixed in that sense, where he's half Chinese, half Black. And my mother is also mixed. She is Portuguese, Cherokee Indian, Black, and Scottish. I'm not just Black, I'm not just Cherokee, I'm all of those things. Black people want to define me as Black, and I seem to have a problem with that, not because I don't like Black people, because I'm partially Black, but because I feel that defining myself as such is ignoring all the other parts of me, and I have a problem with that. White people, they don't see me as white, obviously not, because I don't fit those features, but I don't know, when they try and ask me what I am, it's because they think I look exotic to them. And so if I tell them I have white in them, they're a little surprised. But I think they're probably a little bit more understanding for some reason, I think. Not sure quite why, but they are. My mom has less Black in me than I do, and she considers herself Black, if you ask her. And she has a problem with the fact that I don't identify myself as Black. She thinks it's absurd, which is very funny. She looks more Cherokee than I do. My dad, I've never really spoken to him. It's where he has my complexion, but he has very slant eyes because of his mom. So I really never spoken to him about it, but I know it's an issue of contention with my mom because she has a problem with how I define my race. My mom's reaction to how she defines herself might be from her mom's experience, because her mom was Scottish and Cherokee, but growing up in the South, she's from North Carolina, she had to hide the fact that she had Cherokee in her because she wanted to pass as white. And so if anybody found out that she wasn't pure white, then she'd be Black, even though she didn't have Black in her. In those days, if you had anything else but white, you were Black. And so that's probably why my mom defines herself as Black, because she has Black in her, so she's just Black. So I think there is a generational difference. I was raised
Kitty, that was, again, quite interesting. I can see some similarities. I can hear some similarities with what I've heard from others. So it is very, very interesting that, you were able to capture that. How did you end that? Now, does someone, once they get fully acculturated here in the US, do they change their minds about their race?
I think that does happen many times because knowing that race is just not just, but I mean, knowing it's a construct, that it's not as simple as a drop of blood or whatever, the politics tries to do. The identity emerges based on who the person begins to align with, be it politically or in terms of social justice issues. So you can have the people now who are an adamant part of Black Lives Matter, and they certainly are not Black, and they may be European, actually in Europe and whatever, but it's a philosophy that they are embracing because they see the social justice issue. They see it as a broader thing. And that's probably when identity does become crystallized differently. For her, she wants to remain fluid. And so in a culture that wants you to declare yourself. Yes. And so that's an act of resistance on her part, So the one final thing, though, I did want to bring up was in the process of doing this work and holding the conversations, I was surprised when I ran into an issue that I had not thought about and hadn't encountered before. I dealt with, interviewing people from other parts of the Caribbean, but not so much the Spanish-speaking Caribbean. And discovered in the process of meeting this educator that you're going to hear in a minute, Marta Cruz, a really challenging issue that is going on with people of African descent who are Spanish speaking and immigrate here, and what happens in their relationship to the culture, where you have people who then seem to kind of divide more racially by color country than they did perhaps where they came from originally. So the young people, when you talk about choosing the identity later on, the young people, even those who are born here, are really at a crossroads when it comes to identity. So she can tell you a little bit more about that.
Marta Cruz Jansen was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and she is the most recent voice in the Multicultural Race and Change Oral History Archive. She's often called a Black Hispanic, but she prefers the term Latinegra. In our conversation, one-on-one, she ponders further the challenges of straddling racial and ethnic lines within a Latin culture that denies racial differences.
It is said in Puerto Rico, across Latin America, that everybody has a Black grandma in the closet. ¿Y tu abuela a dónde está? But yet, in the census 2000, in an island that has over 85% of the people have some grandma in the closet, more than 85% of Puerto Ricans chose white. So again, there is a sense
you mean in terms of
in the U.S. Census for the year 2000. Even in countries that have Black ancestry, they prefer to be mestizos, which means to be mixed with Indians, but they will not talk about the Black ancestry. Mexico, they are a nation of mestizos. That's what they say. That's what they say to the world. Mestizo means Indian and white.
Right.
So there is, again, a denial of the Black root. When I came to the mainland, I had a teacher trying to give me some good advice. And she said to me, basically, she says, Marta, you might as well recognize that you are Black, because that's how you're going to be treated. And again, these are Latinos. We have young Latinos in the United States today who are not accepted by the mainstream.
Yes.
because they're black. And they're not at home with the Latino community because we don't want them.
Yeah.
And these are young teenagers who don't fit anywhere. I just gave a presentation where I said they are caught between a rock and a hard place. I have interviewed individuals from the same family, siblings, where one sibling is white, okay, and they live in a white community, many times married to a white spouse, leading a white life. The other sibling is darker, a parent, and they lead a different life altogether in a darker community. And sometimes they call themselves different names.
But I guess it's all in the way you look at things, you know, how perspectives can change from one country to another or from one society to another.
That was very interesting. And I have to tell you that I know a lot of youth, not only in the Hispanic community, but in other cultures as well, are probably faced with the same issue, trying to find their identity. And again, I think this is why forums like this, or even ways where they themselves can dialogue and express how they feel and really how they're evolving and growing as young adults. I know there was an organization that had Unitown. I forgot the name. Basically, they would take a group of students in high school the whole weekend. That's really what they talked about. From all different cultures, Black, white, Hispanic, Asians. And it's amazing, they leave the weekend with such a strong bond, and almost they become the ideal of what we want our world to be. So maybe it's time to start something like that again. But wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Now about you. Tell us a little bit about what you are doing. I have to tell you, I've always admired the work that you do to really bridge the different cultures in our communities. And I think really that's what is needed now more than ever. So thank you for all that you do. I'd like to hear a little more about some of the things you are currently doing. I know you are writing. I know you're doing more presentations. Tell us.
Well, I have the 3 books of that I still use in the presentation. My Story, Multicolored Memories of a Black Southern Girl, the Voices of America, Race and Change in Hollywood, Florida, which was the first group of interviews, 45 interviews or so, and your host was included in that when we first met. And then Multicultural Reflections on Race and Change, where I had college students who began to learn how to do what I do and then writing their story. And those books continue to be important because I use them as an example when I go to different communities and saying, here's one way to collect and use stories to begin to build bridges. Because there's nothing more powerful than sharing our story.
Mm-hmm.
It's hearing our story reflected by someone else. So all of these books represent people having one point of view and then listening to other people and responding, and then it goes back and forth with the sharing. The music, you know, I've always been a singer and I've performed professionally, and I wrote the songs on the CD, The Calling of Our Time. And so when I do presentations, I blend in music, and it's another way to touch people and relax them and bring them into the experience of stories doing presentations. They're virtual now, obviously, but I'll be back on the road when we're able to travel again. And the Encore Public Voices Fellowship has been so wonderful because in this virtual world, as limited as it seems, I'm now doing presentations for people around the world.
Wow. Amazing.
Sharing with you right now, talking some about my experience and what I've discovered, sharing some of the clips of people that who have shared their stories. Now, I have an Apple podcast called Voices of Race and Change, the Younger Generation, that features college students from a variety of backgrounds, and then also high school students who were new immigrants at the time, Haitian and from South and Central America. And the podcast became a wonderful way to get these young people to tell their story, knowing that it's going to be produced and put up on the web. And so now there are 58 programs there that are available for people to listen to share with your children, use it as a model perhaps of what you can do in your organization and your community to bond and bring young people together. And then I have Voices of Race and Change with the elders talking as well. So wonderful opportunities. Finally, the television, 10-part television documentary for public television, Crossing Cultures, Changing Lives, that you were a part of because some of the oral history narrators were invited to come and be on that program. Aired for several years. I became known, I guess, as a culture lady. I would go and I'd be at the store and people would come up, I've seen you. But it was one wonderful response. Well, in this
It was a great project. I was honored to be part of it, Kitty.
Well, people have loved it, and now it is being put on demand by Beacon Television so that people can watch it all over the world.
Wonderful.
And thanks to the Encore Fellowship, we will begin getting some national media about it so that people can go and click on and hear the stories, use them for conversations and sharing, and maybe, go on from there. Hopefully there'll be funding and some new podcasts where I can interview more people and a new TV series.
Awesome. Well, I would like to put that information at the end of the program, because a couple of things you've mentioned, I think, will be very interesting for people who work with youth, for people who work with seniors. So we'll definitely put that information at the end of the program so that it is accessible to our viewers. So Dr. Kitty Oliver, my friend, what a pleasure it was. I so appreciate and enjoyed this. You
Absolutely.
your purpose. When I grow up, I want to be just like you.
You are already, even in your young years.
Awesome. Thank you again. I so appreciate it. You have a great evening, Dr. Oliver.
You too. Thank you for having me.
Okay. To our viewers, we'll be right back.
My goals matter.
My goals matter.
My goals matter.
My dreams matter.
My dreams matter.
My dreams matter.
My future matters.
My future matters.
Black lives matter.
Black lives matter.
It's not enough just to listen. We must act now.
Our struggles may be different,
but we stand in solidarity.
We are one CAA family.
Good evening, Dorothy. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Guithele. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Doing very well. You know, we just had Dr. Kitty Oliver on the program. And, you know, of course, our program's title is Black History, Our Story. And she was phenomenal. She does a phenomenal job. I met her about 25 years ago. We've worked together on a project. She had interviewed me, and it was so wonderful to connect back to her and see she continues with her work till now. So it was great seeing her. So tell us, what do you have for us this evening?
Well, today the topic is our Black pioneers. With this month being Black History Month, and us celebrating people who have not only paved the way for many of us, I wanted to also recognize individuals who we may have not heard of or even read about. Celebrating other individuals who sometimes we use their products or even invented things that we not only use every day, but also need. Today, let's celebrate Marie Van Britten Brown. Marie created an early version of the modern home security system. Feeling unsafe in her neighborhood because of the high crime in the mid-60s, during the civil rights movement, Marie was able to manipulate a motorized camera to record the entry of anyone coming in the front entrance of her home. Marie was a full-time nurse at the time who wanted to make sure her family was safe when she was not around. She also included a two-way microphone in order to communicate with visitors coming to her home. Since then, we have been able to work off of her invention to create today's modernized home security system.
Interesting.
Another person who we also celebrate this month is Alexander Miles. Because of Alexander Miles, the doors to an elevator that automatically opens is thanks to him. His invention was in 1867. Because back then, when the elevators were created, we had to manually open and close the elevator doors back then. But because of Alexander, we can just enjoy our effortless ride in all elevators. So thanks to Marie and Alexander, we have since then improved how we secure our homes and enjoy our elevator ride.
Wonderful. How fascinating. I have to tell you, I did not know about these two individuals, so thank you for sharing this little piece of history, Dorothy.
Have you ever dreamt of having your own television show? If you have, then I have the perfect solution and television station for you to reach hundreds of thousands of viewers. Aries Vision is a television company and media company that can help you get your show on the air. They have tools to help you decide the right platform, like Roku, which is growing, and they absolutely can help you decide between a half an hour slot or an hour slot and get your show on the air fast. Give them a call at 954-990-8056 or email them at ariesvisionllc@gmail.com to get your dream off the ground.
We are back and we have approached the end of our program this evening as we celebrate Black History Month. I really hope we can keep in mind that our children really have many, many facts about our history that they do not know about. As indicated by Dorothy, both the story of Mary Brown as well as Alexander Miles are little facts that can be shared in among family members, maybe during at the table or at an outing. It is up to us to really teach our children at a very young age who they are, what are some of the contributions pioneers and others before them has made. You never know, they may be our next inventors. So with that, I wish you all a wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of your Saturday night. Good night.
Sunrise and sunset, birds fly and rain falls. What a mighty world I see. Seedlings to flowers and little babies to wise ones. What a mighty world I see. We're only here for a moment in time,
but eternity is yours and mine when we wake to the beauty of who we are. What a mighty world. Your hand in my hand, and my heart to your heart. What a mighty love I see. When you call, I answer. If I cry, you comfort. Now that's a mighty love to me. All around us signs appear, telling us there is no fear when we wake to the beauty of all that we are. What a mighty love. Mystery surrounds us. Time passes and things change. What a mighty power I see. All is unfolding, and yet nothing is ever missing. Now that's a mighty power, you see. When you take the time to ponder how we manage through it all, the wonder, the beauty of who we are. And if you take the time and ponder all that you have made it through, be grateful for all that you are. What a mighty power have we. What a mighty love every day I choose to see. We live in a mighty, mighty world.